Boulder, Colorado, America's skinniest city, which sounds great, but there's a dark side.
Is there really a dark side? Let's talk about it. I attended the University of Colorado at Boulder from around summer 2011 until spring 2015, so I basically lived there for about 5 years. And even after graduating, my best friend lived there, so I still visited until about 2021, 2022. So here's my perspective or analysis of The Dark Truth of America's Skinniest City by Will Tennyson. A couple of disclaimers before we get started. Number one, I will be talking about eating disorders, so trigger warning if any of that bothers you. And number two, if you're a returning follower, this is not going to be my usual content. I usually talk about anime and nerdy stuff, but today we're not. This is like typical long form stuff, which I'm not used to, so hopefully you will still enjoy it. I wanted to start with my initial thoughts for the video. So I will be doing a lot of nitpicking, but overall I think it was a fine video, it was okay, it was informative. But I think it's also obvious that the video is going to have limited views and opinions. It's only 25 minutes long, it is not a comprehensive look at Boulder, and it is from the view of a fit white man, which will be important because we're going to be talking about different biases. And the other couple of things that really stuck out to me is that Will loves humor, which is great, and he also needs a paycheck, which is also not inherently bad. But I bring this up because some topics in the video were kind of sensationalized, dramatized, just like the title of my own video. And unfortunately, as a videographer, those things always stick out to me. I can't ignore them, but I also know it's pretty necessary in order to get your content seen, for people to just pay attention. But again, overall, I think it was a good video, and I'm glad that it really started to get people to think about fitness versus health and what health really is. So in order to understand what angle I'm coming from when I dissect this video, here's my background and my own biases. I grew up in a black military Christian household, and before I went to Boulder, I was pretty much around military, Christian, white, poor, and middle class people. So one part of me came to Boulder as a bit of an outsider. A lot of things were very different and new for me. And then the other part of me, which was a bit more natural, if you will, was being a student athlete. I did Taekwondo all 5 years that I was there. I was really into fitness and just doing activities that required moving your body. I wouldn't necessarily say I was super outdoorsy, but I was open to the idea of it. So I think depending on what angle I came from, some parts of Boulder to me were very foreign and very weird. Other parts were very familiar and not weird at all. Some other major things that shaped my perspective included being a photographer and videographer who was also involved in the hip hop and dance community. I was a physiology major who had an emphasis on the PT track, so I was really focused on the human body and exercise and movement. Outside of Taekwondo, I was in two major student groups, if you will. I accidentally joined this group that was like 90% Asian people. It wasn't meant for Asian people, they were just the people who made up the group. And then I was also in a scholarship program which was made for minorities. So between Taekwondo, which is a very diverse sport, the group that was mostly Asian people, and the scholarship program I was in, for the first time ever, despite being in a very white area in a very white school, my closest friends, my support group, my inner circle was mostly non-white. After healthcare, I went to work in healthcare, just low-level entry jobs, but I was working in physical therapy, orthopedics, vaccine clinics, and just taking in as much information as I can. So all of that will feed into my perspective about health, fitness, and the human body. So one of my biggest critiques about this video is some of the hyperbolic phrases or the misguided critiques. And obviously this wasn't meant to be the most serious video I'm doing the most right now. I'm being very critical. And I don't know that much about Will. I don't know if he has an editor. I don't know if he does the editing. I don't know the full direction of the video. But one common occurrence was that Will would have some sort of skeptical attitude or mindset, and then it would be cleared up later. And it was framed in kind of a funny way. In the very beginning, he mentions how it's taboo to drive a car and how each person has like 5 bikes. I remember pausing the video right there and telling my friend that's definitely not true. And then like seconds later, he goes, oh, never mind. People drive here and they don't stare at you for driving. And again, it's funny, it's humorous, it lightens the mood, but it does kind of push a narrative. It does kind of prime your brain into looking for something, even if it's not there. And there were some times where he didn't backpedal and didn't give any clarification. So I want to go over some examples of times where he didn't give any clarification to actually give a more realistic perspective. The first moment I thought of is when Will went to that Just Be restaurant, and then he mentioned on the menu it has Just Be Naughty for the dessert menu. That restaurant is in Boulder, it's in Denver, and it's in one other city in Colorado, so it's not just a Boulder restaurant, it's not something specific to Boulder. And I feel like the phrasing that menu may not be the best for people, making people feel guilty about their decisions, but it's not really uncommon. I've seen it in plenty of other restaurants around the nation. Already people use the word like decadent to describe desserts, so it just didn't feel like that was a very big point. It wasn't really anything proving that Boulder was culty or anti-dessert or anti-happiness or whatever. The second moment that really stuck out to me is when Will talked about how this was the first ice cream place that he saw, and I know that area. Okay, well, I barely remember it because I haven't been in a while. But within a 5-minute walk, there's a Ben & Jerry's, there's a Haagen-Dazs, and then in that general area, Pearl Street, there's a lot of places to get dessert, baked goods. There's a cookie store that I always went to as a college student. So it could be a true fact that that is the first ice cream place that he saw, but the reality is it's not the only one, and there's a lot of stuff nearby. Also, it's a gelato place. It's not meant to be healthy. It's like the hype is that it's Italian and the owner's from Italy. And again, it's not Boulder specific. There's one in Denver and another city. So again, it's kind of like the entire reason that he pointed this place out was to make a point of like Boulder being healthy, but the point wasn't really there. Number 3, I feel like the chicken sandwich and the beets thing at the very end of the video was actually pretty disingenuous. The Sink is a burger restaurant and a bar that has very good pizza, and there's like a whole thing when I was in school, Obama came to visit, and he went to the Sink, and instead of getting a burger, he got a pizza, and everyone's like, he got a pizza, why would you do that? But their pizza is really good. And I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but never in my life have I been in Boulder and seen anybody, anywhere, just willingly order a side of beets. The sandwiches don't even come with beets, they come with french fries or coleslaw. The beets are like an extra side that you can add on. It's like a supreme side or an extra side, whatever they call it, a specialty side. So again, that's not even Boulder culture, that's not Boulder being healthy. He chose to get beets when I've never seen anyone eat beets before. He chose to get a chicken sandwich at a burger place, which pushes this narrative, which isn't necessarily true. And I saved this 4th example for last because it does tie into exercise and fitness. Me personally, I don't think that the outdoor calisthenics gym was that important or that much of a piece of evidence showing how ridiculously fit Boulder is. But number 1, unless Boulder has changed, I've never seen that park in my life. Maybe it's new, maybe I just didn't go there. But number 2, I've never seen anyone go there nor talk about it. I was surprised when I saw that. But I feel like it's a kind of niche thing and not a lot of people do it. Granted, a lot of people do go climbing in Boulder. The average person is not doing ring rows or working out at an outdoor calisthenics gym. But I have seen gyms like this in major cities, so again, it just doesn't feel very revolutionary. But like I just said, Boulder is a very active city in general. Part of that is due to the culture of Boulder itself, which when you go there, you're going to be more likely to assimilate. But the other part is that Boulder attracts people with similar mindsets. It's already close to the mountains, it's close to the ski resorts, it's close to Red Rocks, it's close to Denver, so you can have the outdoors and the city life right next to you. And people actively come to Boulder for the skiing opportunities, for the biking opportunities. And I also remember when I was there was this gym called Apex Movement Boulder, which was a very prominent free running and parkour school, known all across the US. So a bunch of people who did parkour, free running, tricking came to Boulder to train and find community. So for a lot of people, being active is more of a lifestyle and less of a chore or some duty that they have to fulfill. So if a bunch of people just naturally have an athletic or a fit lifestyle, is there really a pressure to be skinny or fit? Yes, there is. And I bring up skinny and fit because these two are different things, but they're often interchanged. In case you didn't know why Boulder was called America's Skinniest City, there was a report in Gallup in 2011, and Boulder had the least amount of people in the BMI range of obese. So it doesn't mean that everyone was skinny or underweight. It doesn't mean that some people weren't overweight. It just means that Boulder had the lowest rate of obesity compared to other cities. And the funny thing for me is the reason why I started school in summer of 2011 technically is because the scholarship program I was in had a summer program so that the students could get adjusted to the university without all the hoopla and hustle and bustle going on. And during that time, we would take classes and live on campus as if we were on students. And I actually did a little project or a study on BMI and learned how unreliable BMI is. I have been considered overweight since probably late college. So while BMI is a tool, it is not the most effective tool to understand people's body composition or their fitness levels. As for me personally, I never had this pressure to be skinny because I grew up skinny. My childhood trauma was actually being made fun of for being too skinny and being told how disgusting I looked. And then I was a bit of an oddball because I started working out solely to get good at Taekwondo. I didn't care about my body, how it looked. The aesthetics that happened with that just happened as a result. But I remember I went from like skinny to having muscles, and people started to treat me differently no matter where I was. When I was at Boulder, when I was at home, on vacation, the way people looked at me and treated me throughout my life just drastically changed. But if I were to dig a bit more deeply, I'd say that the pressure to be skinny or to be fit was really to not be fat, to not be lazy, and depending on your gender, to be muscular. I think the closest pressure I had to being skinny was from Taekwondo because it is a weight class-based sport, and like any weight class-based sport, you have to stay in your weight class. I did not care about that. I chose to fight really tall people. I chose to make my life hard because I didn't care about being skinny. I wanted to be healthy. And for me, I knew what health was, especially because I was studying the human body. But again, that's very sport specific and not just specific to Taekwondo, not just specific to Boulder. So I really wouldn't factor that into the experience of Boulder. So going back to my friend group, even though I had a lot of white peers and acquaintances, I still had a lot of non-white friends. I was one of those people who could walk through campus and every time I was walking by, I saw someone I knew. I just had a lot of connections back in college. But I remember a lot of my friends who came to Boulder and who were not white would talk about how they weren't the white, rich, skinny person that they saw. They weren't invited to parties as much, they weren't asked out as much by other people. They felt inadequate, they had racist things happen to them. So even though I didn't necessarily feel an extreme pressure about my body type, I know that a lot of my friends and peers did. And a good chunk of my friends didn't come to Boulder specifically to hike or rock climbing or go skiing or do stereotypically white activities. But I definitely remember the women in my social circles talking about the pressure that they face while being in Boulder. The pressure of not being white, the pressure of not being hot enough, of not being rich enough, of not being skinny enough. And the truth is, despite Boulder being this kind of happy, hippie, open town with a lot of community, it is still very white. There's still a lot of money there, so class and privilege contribute to these cultist vibes, and it's not just fitness. And I think that the father that was interviewed actually leans into this idea of whiteness and culture and privilege. I'm starting to sound like I'm in my freshman sociology class all over. So after reading the comments of that video, I know that there's a lot of controversy about that guy, and I will just say that your opinion about him is basically based on your worldviews. Some people think he's a creep, some people think he's just telling the truth, some people think it's not that serious, some people think there's a language barrier. So I think what I'm about to say might sound annoying and soft to some people, or too nice to other people. But immediately, I felt like his opinion was kind of an outlier. In the same way that I wasn't just someone who lived in Boulder, but I was a black man, and that blackness changed my perspective. That man clearly had an accent, and it seemed that he had another culture or identity that wasn't tied to Boulder that affected his answers in his worldview. And a lot of people mentioned that he had a language barrier, but I really didn't feel like there was a language barrier issue. I felt like his gender and his culture was influencing his answers. Not so much that he didn't have the language to do so. But I'm a millennial, I'm not afraid to say it. He was telling the truth, and it's not just a Boulder issue, it's around the world. Men like younger women. That doesn't mean I agree with that. That's how society has conditioned people around the world. And even though I won't deep dive into it, one thing that 2024 has shown us between a bunch of allegations is that wealth and power leads to more deviant acts or dating younger. A person with the status, money, and power might date someone 5, 10, 20 plus years younger than them. And because Boulder does have a lot of lawyers, it has a lot of wealthy people, I feel like a lot of these people will kind of follow that same trend of trying to date someone younger, healthier. Furthermore, your environment does affect your desires or who you have your eyes on, if you will. I don't know the best phrasing for that. So if you're surrounded by a bunch of skinny, fit, muscular, hot people, you'll probably want to look for people who are skinny, fit, muscular, hot. If you're surrounded by a bunch of white people, you're probably more likely to date a white person. So yes, I do know that Boulder has an issue with body types and being shallow and having unrealistic expectations for people. I just cannot say how much of that is attributed solely to fitness lifestyle and how much of it is attributed to patriarchy, society, other things. I can say that a lot of people aren't aware of their environment and how it affects them.
Probably can be, but I don't think so.
Yeah.
Nobody ever said anything.
It's because you're
to
part
me.
of the cult. You don't see it.
Moving on to niceness. Yes, Boulder is a very nice city. Colorado in general is a very nice state. I remember I had a roommate who came from a not so nice city, and when he came to Boulder, he was like, whoa, everyone talks to me, everyone smiles, I'm not used to this. I think there really is a sense of community, there really is a sense of looking out for your neighbors, but also some of it is performative. It's a little bit like the Southern hospitality. Behind people caring about your pronouns and your dietary restrictions is also a lot of microaggressions. When I was in Boulder, it definitely felt a lot safer than a lot of other cities I've been to, but I've still been stopped by the police, I've been racially profiled, I had a professor make a racist remark about me in front of the entire class. My friends and I were just always surprised by some of the incredibly white takes. Everyone in Boulder wants to seem like they're an ally, there's no war embossing say. That's the culture. I feel like that is another pressure, the pressure to be nice. I think a very interesting point in this video is that the first time we see people who say that things are not that great are people who are not skinny or fit. There are two men who seem to be Latino talking about how people seem to be more smug in Boulder and it's harder to make friends. And then we have that juxtaposed of two Asian women talking about how people talk to you versus how they really feel about you. And obviously I can't read their minds, I didn't interview them, but considering I had a lot of people who again weren't white telling me about this, I would assume they're talking about that weirdness, that fakeness that we get from people in Boulder, specifically white people in Boulder. Every person of color is not going to feel like this, but a very common experience that we had was feeling like some things were just fake. It was a fantasy reality for white people. Or rather, they just genuinely could not experience the other reality that we faced as non-white people. So when Will mentioned the slight cult vibes being around veganism and CrossFit, that reminded me of how I've never really had in-depth conversations about Boulder being a cult, specifically. But I've had a lot of conversations about Boulder and the opinion of Boulder in general. And one thing I've noticed is that people change the emphasis of what they think is weird or different about Boulder based on their identity. So a Christian might think of it as this really weird, unchristian like drug abusing place. A black person might view it as the rich white person place. A poor person or a person who doesn't work out that much might think of it as a very smug place. People in the military know it as that place that breaks all the rules and does a lot of pot. It feels like every time I have a white friend who climbs, they love Boulder. But the common denominator is that everyone knows that Boulder is weird, it's eccentric. There's even the term the Boulder bubble, and it's funny because depending on who you talk to, that term changes. Some people think of it as like there's this tight-knit community, a bubble. Other people think of it as a snobby group that doesn't get out and thinks too highly of themselves. And while some of these things that are tied to fitness and skinniness, such as veganism, CrossFit, hiking, being outdoors, some of those are inherently tied to things such as whiteness, privilege, the ability to afford to care about your healthcare. It's always going to be easier to see those things when you're not in the inner circle, when you don't look and feel like everybody else. At this point in the video, you should understand that a big theme is nuance, and I do want to just quickly go over transportation. So yes, a lot of people don't use cars in Boulder partly because they don't need to and it's cheaper. I grew up in an area that wasn't a walkable city that didn't have very good public transportation, so you had to learn how to drive. In Boulder, the Denver area, you don't necessarily have to drive. You can just take public transport and you'll be perfectly fine. There is the pressure of biking and walking and being healthy and saving the environment, but it's more of a privilege to own 4 bikes than it is to just take public transport. Sometimes this persona of Boulder is being so snobby that people don't want to use their cars, but another side to it is that Boulder actually is a very walkable city, allowing people the resources to make the environmentally sound and financially responsible decision of using public transport and not using the car all the time. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was health versus fitness. And I thought that this was the most valuable thing about the entire video, which was also like the main point, the driving point of this video. Fitness, in short, is how well you perform a task, how fast you can run, how far you can run, how well you can do a sport, how well you can do this physical activity. Health is an overall holistic approach at your mental state, your social skills, your physical fitness, your resistance to disease. How's your diet? How's your mental health? You can be healthy without being an extreme athlete, and you can be an Olympian and an alcoholic. I really had nothing to say about the conversation with the health expert Brooke Alexander. I thought that was spot on. And I can personally confirm that a lot of people in Boulder were fit, but not necessarily healthy or as healthy as they thought they were. A lot of people struggled with body image issues, no matter how fit they were, no matter how athletic they were. And if you don't know, Boulder is known as a party town, so I will say that does keep my idea of Boulder, because I remember just a lot of people drinking and smoking and doing drugs, which maybe is not representative of the entirety of Boulder, but I don't know. At a certain point in the video, Will mentions that nobody around was smoking, and the funny thing is Boulder is known for weed and beer. Colorado is known for weed and beer. I went to school when they started to crack down for 420, but prior to that, every year people would come from around the world to come celebrate 420 on the campus of Boulder and just smoke. And I remember a very big culture shock for me was coming to Boulder and people would ask like what your vices are or something, and people would be like, oh, I don't smoke, I only drink. Next thing you know, you see them at a party, they're smoking hookah and they're smoking weed, and they're like, oh no, that's not smoking cigarettes, that's called smoking, this is smoking hookah, this is smoking weed. And then at some point as I was studying in Boulder, there was a ban on smoking on campus, and then eventually a ban on smoking at certain areas within Boulder itself, including Pearl Street, which is where Will was hanging out. So of course nobody is going to be out smoking cigarettes when number 1, it's technically illegal in certain areas, and number 2, people hate cigarettes because they'll most likely be smoking weed in private, whether that's in their car, at home, on the hill, and then after a nice jog or hike they'll go get drinks and get drunk. So what is health? How do you really define health? And hopefully as science develops and these conversations progress, we'll understand that thinness and fatness are not the only indicators of health and wellness, but we also need to factor in things such as status, class, wealth, and community to the conversation.